Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kerry, and welcome. You might know this guy, too.
Hi, everyone.
Goldwyn, otherwise known as my very difficult director from last night's episode. But we wanted to thank you for joining us. While we were filming the crossover episode, Tony and I were so moved by the issues we were talking about in the episode, talking about criminal justice reform, and Tony does a lot of work around these issues. And so we thought it would be really great for you guys to have more context for what's really going on in the world of criminal justice reform and around the Innocence Project in particular, because Tony works a lot with the Innocence Project, and I think that's great. I'm not going to make fun of Tony about this, although I make fun of him about most things.
You can make fun of me. Why put up barriers
because this
to
is
your
a
mockery?
really amazing thing that you do in the world. So anyway, we're super happy that you joined us. I'm going to toss to Tony so he can introduce you to everybody.
Okay,
here.
we have some really extraordinary people with us. For those of you that don't know, I'll tell you a little bit about what the Innocence Project is.
Yes.
And Vanessa, you can correct me when I mess it up. But
Just
for several years now, I've been involved with this extraordinary organization called the Innocence Project that is really in the business of freeing people who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes. And we're going to hear a lot more about that. But two extraordinary men named Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld founded it in 1989, right?
92.
92. See, you got my first mistake. And pioneered what you guys have probably heard about, the use of DNA.
Yeah.
DNA evidence to prove unequivocally, as Barry called it, God's fingerprint, that someone, for the first time it was possible to absolutely prove that someone was innocent of a crime. So the Innocence Project really has been not only exonerated a lot of people who've spent decades sometimes in prison, they have now become they're at the sort of tip of the spear of criminal justice reform in this country and have done and are doing a lot of incredible work to not only free the innocent, but to reform our system in general, which as
Through
was touched
policy
upon,
change,
through
right?
policy change in a lot of ways that Vanessa can tell us about. But I want to introduce two people. Gina Papera-Ewing is with us, who has worked with the Innocence Project, but is actually now in your final year of UCLA Law School,
Yes,
right?
almost done.
Yeah, and Gina is going to go to work in the Bronx Public Defender's Office. Bronx, sorry.
Down, Bronx.
I had to say Brooklyn
Bronx.
just to
to
good
mess with
Kerry.
me.
So that, what the big issue in last night's episode was of underfunded public defenders, and Gina's going to join those ranks.
Bravely.
So we thought it'd be really
Proudly.
cool
Oh,
to hear Gina's
so great.
perspective as someone who's about to get into this, critically important work, and someone who's been doing it for a while is the extraordinary Vanessa Potkin, who I will just, because Vanessa has done so much, I'm just going to read
She's
this
so
over you.
accomplished, you got to read about it.
Vanessa is the Director of Post-Conviction Litigation at the Innocence Project, and she joined the Innocence Project in 2000 as its first staff attorney. So that means that, before that, I think Peter and Barry, the founders, were really doing a lot of the work with law students to help. That was the sort of model of the Innocence Project. And Vanessa really came in as the first, real staff attorney to help them, and has since represented and exonerated over 30 innocent individuals from Louisiana to Nevada, and they have collectively served over 500 years of wrongful imprisonment. So think about that for a second.
Wow.
Vanessa is a nationally recognized expert on wrongful conviction and the use of DNA to establish innocence, as well as other exculpatory forms of evidence such as false confessions, eyewitness misidentification, informant testimony, faulty forensics, otherwise I was told not to use the term prosecutorial misconduct, and ineffective assistance of counsel, which is really the issue that we were, that Viola Davis's, Kerry Annalise Keating, was her class action suit for all of those of you who saw our fabulous Scandal How to Get Away with Murder crossover last night. And if you haven't, get on Hulu and watch it, or abc.com, because it was really, really powerful, I thought, even though I'm biased.
You directed one of the hours. But
I did. I
also-
really thought the first hour was just amazing.
Setting up Fuentes.
So
for the
let's,
second hour.
Yeah, that's right. Zetna Fuentes did the other one, and she did an incredible job
But
too.
I just want to say, if
Yeah.
if you did see it and you were inspired, because obviously you were inspired by what you saw because you're here with us now. So I want to just let you know that on your screen is the website for the Innocence Project, so you can go there at any point and get more information. You should forward that website to everybody you know. You should just get educated about these issues. Tuning into us right now should be the beginning of your relationship with these issues. If it's something that speaks to you, you can really make a difference. And also, if you go to the Innocence Project's Facebook page, you can actually donate there. There's a donate button at the top of that page. So at any point in this conversation, like even right now, you could go there and donate to start to make a difference. Because obviously this is an issue that requires a lot of funding. These lawyers need a lot of support to do the work they're doing, really God's work. The fact that they've saved 500 years of wrongful time in prison from people's lives,
And that's
giving
just your
people back
clients.
500 years, 500 years of their lives. That's pretty
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah. So thanks, Kerry. That's great. That's great, and I really second that. So let's talk a little bit, Vanessa, about you saw the shows last night.
Yeah.
And how sort of on point were for you in terms of the work that you do and have done now for almost 20 years with the Innocence Project. On how on point with Viola's that case and this issue, how would you kind of
What resonated
shed
for
light
you?
on that? What resonated for you, and how can we help people understand better, really, to frame this issue?
This is one of the most critical issues of our time and facing the criminal justice system today. Our public defender system is in crisis. Our public defenders are overworked. They have caseloads that are 2-3 times what the recommendations are. They're underfunded. There's a great disparity between funding that we give to prosecutors and what we give to defense attorneys. So in places like New Orleans, you have the Office of the Public Defender saying, we can't even take any more cases. We're not equipped to handle any more cases. They have 9 investigators at that office to investigate 18,000 felonies
moly.
and misdemeanors a year.
So just to put that in context, what I've learned just in preparing for this conversation is that at any given time we think there might be 23,000 people wrongfully convicted in prison at any time in this country, right?
Well,
More
and
than
that's
that,
a
right?
that's a conservative
That's
estimate.
conservative. I've heard
So,
120,000.
yeah, we have 2.3 million people in prison. So if you said the most conservative estimate, maybe
Wow.
23,000,
I had heard 120,000. Is that
could be
Wow.
120,000.
We
I
actually
mean,
don't
4% maybe
Nobody
of the
knows.
people
No.
in prison?
and there's estimations that 4% of people on death row have been proven to be actually innocent.
So
and
if our
yeah.
public defenders aren't getting the funding that they need and the resources that they need, what that means is that our promise to say in our culture you're innocent until proven guilty is a lie, right? Because people aren't getting the resources to be able to prove their innocence, which they shouldn't even have to prove.
That's correct. And so we supposedly have the presumption of innocence, but we also have a bail system where
Yeah.
people get put, arrested, and then bail is set. It could be a couple $100,000, it could be a couple $100. But if you can't afford that bail, you're basically stuck in prison. And if you're indigent, you're relying on a public defender. And if that public defender is overworked and can't get to you for a month, then there's every incentive just to plead guilty to whatever they've charged
So you
you
can
with to
get
just get
out.
out of prison.
So on that point, just to let people know, it's been a really extraordinary year so far for the Innocence Project, with 6 exonerations in the past 3 months. 6 people have been freed
Just
after
this year.
the past 3
So far.
months.
Wow.
And the most recent was yesterday, not freed, but Alfred Swinton was exonerated yesterday. Right now, was that the case you wanted to say that was a perfect example of an inadequate defense, or was that another of your cases this year?
That was another man, Malcolm Alexander,
That's
who
right.
was exonerated January 30th from Angola prison, where he spent 38 years.
38 years for something he didn't do.
He was locked up when he was 20 years old. His family hired an attorney, but the attorney just did nothing to defend him, didn't file any pretrial motions, waived opening statements. He was convicted at a trial that lasted 1 day. They picked the jury, heard all of the evidence. The defense attorney didn't put anything on, didn't cross-examine witnesses. the whole conviction rested on a single eyewitness ID, and the witness was unsure of her identification, but none of that came out at trial because the defense attorney just failed to bring it out. And so in one day, he was sentenced and convicted and then sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. And that's, so when people think of, criminal defense attorneys in this country, they think of Annalise Keating, right? They think of somebody who's, investigating cases, fighting the good fight, trials that go on for months, resources to testing, investigation. And the truth is that's not what people get because our system is in crisis.
Can you talk a little bit more about why that is? What are some of the drivers? And so, we talked, we were sort of talking yesterday on the phone about, or the day before, about incentives, how do you see why are defense attorneys so underfunded and so overtaxed versus prosecutors? And what about police and prosecutors? That was sort of where I was going to go afterwards to remedies, because you do have, there is good news.
Yeah,
there is light at the end of the tunnel. But first, let's talk so people can understand the reasons, whether you're frankly innocent or not. You have the right to fair representation. So why are things so, you said, broken in the way that you said?
Well, we're not funding public defenders adequately, and so you have great disparities. So in New Orleans, for example, we'll just take that again. The public defenders have to handle 85% of all cases that are processed, but they only have a third of the budget that the prosecution does to process those same amount of cases. And so there's great funding disparities between the defense and the prosecution. There's also incentives in the system in prosecutors' offices. Prosecutors are promoted when they get convictions. They're not promoted when they look at a case and say there's not enough evidence, let's dismiss it. There's also, we see in New York City, we've recently had 900,000 cases, summonses that were thrown out that were found to be completely baseless. 900,000 over a course of a few years because precincts were imposing a quota system where you had to arrest people, and who's going to be arrested? It's going to be people of color, who are going to be targeted, and so that was what was going on in New York City and recently exposed. So those are people who were 900 incidents where people were completely innocent of what they were charged with. Now these are low-level crimes, misdemeanors, violations, but those have real serious consequences for people's lives. It affects, whether you can get a job, whether you can get education,
Absolutely.
where you can live. So the ramifications are just very profound.
You mentioned, well, let's talk about the issue of color. How does that factor into it? Because the numbers, maybe you can share with people some of the statistics which they may be familiar with, but what is the disparity and what are some of the drivers of that from your perspective?
Well, it's really selective enforcement of the law. We know that white people do drugs and sell drugs at equal rates, if not, as some studies show, greater rates than people of color, and yet who is being arrested and prosecuted for drug crimes? The war on drugs is largely a war on people of color and poor people in this country. And so when it comes to, who we're incarcerating, there are, just unacceptable disparities. You go to a place like Angola Prison where Malcolm Alexander just walked out of, and that was a plantation that turned into a prison. And when Malcolm Alexander was sentenced there in 1980, he went there to pick cotton. And so there is the legacy of, slavery and Jim Crow, continues to this day.
So really, it's what Ava DuVernay's documentary, if you guys have seen the 13th, that's what it's about.
Yes.
Right? Literally, that's her point, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to get to some of the questions that you guys so thoughtfully sent in, and hopefully we can get to the hope part of it also.
The
To
future.
some of the solutions that are going to be happening in the Bronx. So let's get to Yvonne Ibisers asks, which states do not provide compensation to the wrongfully convicted? Is that something that the Innocence Project is involved in trying to change?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, that is a huge priority for us. 32 states and the federal government do compensate victims of wrongful conviction, but that leaves 18 states that don't. Nevada's one of them. We just had a client who was exonerated after 15 years, one of our few female clients, Kirsten Blaze Lovato. She walked out January 3rd. And so, there's some states that have no compensation laws on the books, and then there's some like Louisiana that are woefully inadequate. The most that you can receive is $250,000 plus, education and some job training. So we have to make sure that every state has a law to compensate victims of wrongful conviction. I mean, just imagine, these are individuals who through no fault of their own, were essentially kidnapped by the state and thrown in prison for something they didn't do and lost, years of their life. And the ramifications are generational. With Malcolm Alexander, he has a grandson who's 20 who can't afford to go to college. Well, if his grandfather hadn't been incarcerated and had been there for his father, where would he be today? And so it not only affects the person who's wrongfully convicted, but the families. And so we need to compensate victims of wrongful conviction.
I think this is for Tony. How has getting involved with the Innocence Project affected your views on prison reform?
Well, and this is from Fotini from Greece. So Fotini, I got involved with the Innocence Project not long after Vanessa joined. I made a film about a true Innocence Project case called Conviction about a man named Kenny Waters who was convicted of murder, a murder he did not commit, and he spent 18 and a half years in prison. And his sister, Betty Ann, who had never graduated from high school, went back to school and became an attorney just to try and get her brother out. But until I started working on that film, and the Innocence Project, by the way, helped her get him out on DNA evidence, I assumed that our criminal justice system basically worked. It seemed to make sense, and I thought, well, if you're in prison, there's probably a reason, for the most part, that you're there. And I quickly learned that was absolutely not the case, as you heard from what we've been hearing from Vanessa. So I saw what the Innocence Project was doing and just got passionate about it and thought, what can I do? And I can help tell stories. So we did the television series The Divide a few years ago, and just in any way I can, like this, try and spread the word of the extraordinary work that people like Vanessa is doing, and soon Gina will be doing. That's how I got involved.
Kay asks, witnessing two powerful women work together to fight for criminal justice reform and against social injustice is so inspiring and empowering. What message would you like to share with all the young girls out there?
How about Gina?
Yeah,
good thought. Jump in there.
That's such an important piece of my story personally. I worked with Vanessa Potkin for 3 years straight out of college, and I can say with 100% certainty that I would not be on this trajectory if it wasn't for her. Working in criminal justice, working as a lawyer, it can often be a very male-dominated profession, and so you really have to be tough. And seeing very tough women walk into courtrooms, dominate space, and care so passionately and deeply about the work that they are doing was transformative. And so, to young girls out there, find your mentors. There are so many powerful women out there to look up to. Don't give up on it and follow that path. If you have great women out there doing it, you can do it too. So, yeah, stick to it.
There's this great phrase that John Lewis uses all the time about getting in good trouble. He talks about good trouble, which is what he did in the civil rights movement, getting arrested for the right things. And we were talking before that one of the things I love about the crossover is that Olivia Pope and Annalise Keating are very imperfect women, but they are extraordinarily powerful, but they have closets full of skeletons. And yet they choose in the journey of this crossover to be in good trouble together. They really choose to use their power together for good and to have it. And in doing so, which I think is important, it helps them both overcome some of their own insecurities and inner demons, because I think when you show up in service, it really brings the best part of you forward. So also, don't be afraid. If you feel like, I don't know if I'm a powerful woman yet, I don't have a mentor yet, or I'm not sure, just go for it. Just show up, call the Innocence Project, volunteer, get involved, and you'll discover the strongest, best parts of yourself. And on the days when you feel like you don't have that, you'll show up anyway because it's for somebody else.
How was that for you, Vanessa, as a woman in this profession? I mean, you work for two extraordinary men, with Barry and Peter. But I mean, in a male-dominated world. Just on that, what's your perspective as someone who's succeeded in such a
Right. Well,
powerful
it's
way?
interesting. I think we're at a changing time. I have a daughter who's 7 years old, and she comes to the Innocence Project, and we'll be around Gina and the other women in the office. And I recently told her that my nephew wanted to be a lawyer, and she looked at me very inquisitively and said, "Men aren't lawyers."
Oh, really?
I was like, "It's a new day."
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So there's two more questions that are kind of
Okay.
similar that I think would help us wrap up, because it's time to wrap up, sadly. We want to thank you guys for sending in so many thoughtful questions. But at Goldwyn Dempsey asks, I think they like you, how can the majority of citizens help in spreading more awareness and information about these issues that concern justice and equality for people? And similarly, Melanie from Canada asked, how can we get involved with the Innocence Project around the world? So what can we do? How can we, I know that there's hope, I know that there are ways we can change this. How can we support you?
So part of it is getting active. I mean, you can support the work of the Innocence Project directly by funding the work. All of our money comes from private donations and foundations, so that money is essential to the work that we do to exonerate people, reform the system.
And you represent people for free.
Yes.
Because people pay nothing
Yeah.
for the Innocence Project's representation.
And we have to get DNA testing and other experts, and so there's a lot involved in our representation. Aside from that, go to the Innocence Project website, sign up to be a part and to receive our action alerts, because there are times when we're calling on people in certain states and we need your help to get reforms passed. That we have learned a lot about what can reduce the number of wrongful convictions and what can just make the system fairer overall. We need to make sure we're videotaping interrogations, we're changing the way that we administer our photo identification procedures. We need to make sure that when science changes, or so not junk science, but these unvalidated sciences, when we come to learn that
Like bite mark testimony,
bite mark
hair
testimony,
what are some of the other
hair
ones?
microscopy, we've learned that people used to think that there were signs of charring in fires that meant that accelerant had to be used, and now we've come to learn that those are totally accidental fires. So you had people convicted of arson and killing loved ones in fires that were completely accidental. So we need to make sure that we have laws so people can get back into court when we have a new understanding of what sciences aren't really reliable, and that we can get back into court. We need to make sure that there's discovery, and so that the defense has access to what the state does. There was a case from North Carolina, a man named Mr. Gell, who was almost sentenced to death, and there were papers in the state's file that ultimately, the defense received after they went to an open file discovery, which showed that 17 witnesses had seen the victim when he was supposed to be dead, and Mr. Gell was supposed to have committed the crime, and so that completely changed everything. So getting involved, also get involved in local elections. A lot of prosecutors are elected, and there are prosecutors now who are running on progressive platforms, who support innocence reforms, who support funding for indigent defense, and so get behind those people, find out who's running and support them, because the biggest difference we can make is having prosecutors in place who are ethical and are interested in uncovering wrongful convictions.
And there are many who are really doing extraordinary work and
That's
creating new
right.
models, like in the
Ken
Brooklyn DA's
Thompson
office.
in the Brooklyn
right.
DA's office, and
There's a
now
conviction
DA
review
Gonzalez.
unit. Yeah. Mhm.
They have invested a lot of resources into reinvestigating cases. So we need to make sure they do it on the back end, and then adopt reforms on the front end to make
So
sure this
once
doesn't
again, it's
happen.
about, we have, especially with social media and
Yeah.
it's the ballot box, getting out and voting and doing just a little bit of homework, because you can research.
Yeah.
You vote down the ballot and look, if you're in your area, someone, the DAs are elected, just do a little homework, go to someone's website and see what their positions are. And that's how we can make a huge difference. And then the other thing, just to reiterate what Vanessa just said about the action alerts, if you go to the Innocence Project website and sign up for the action alerts, social media is an incredibly powerful tool. If you find out there's something in your state or your area, you can make a difference in your network, right?
Absolutely. And become a lawyer, and join
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah,
Join the
do
good
Or
that.
tell the
fight.
stories.
Yeah,
Keep
right.
telling the
Yeah.
stories so
I
people
wanna,
know.
to that, I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in, and for tuning in here, and also for tuning in last night. Shondaland gets to tell such extraordinary stories, because when we tell stories like this, you guys show up with your eyeballs and your social media and you say, we wanna partake in stories that matter. You should go watch Tony's film Conviction.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a proud wifey plug. And you should also watch a movie called Crown Heights,
Yes,
which my
yes.
husband made this year, Nnamdi
Nnamdi
Asomugha.
Yeah.
And he's actually working with the
Made it,
Innocence
started,
Project,
and
too.
produced.
He started it and produced it, and he's amazing.
Yeah.
He's now an Innocence ambassador.
Yeah.
of the
Yes,
Innocence
and
Project.
he's working with the Innocence Project too. And he didn't force me to do this. I did this on my own.
This was actually
but-
Kerry's idea. You came up to me and said, "Wouldn't it be a great idea if we did this?"
And I'm so glad we did. And thank you so
Thank you
much for
for
being
all
here.
of
And
you.
everybody go to the website. Everybody donate. Even $1, just donate. It'll make you feel good. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.